Bienvenidos, fans of the hottest entertainment on the planet. Jaimé En Fuego here, and so very stoked to be presenting the first of my reviews from Fantasia International Film Festival 2026. Festival kicked off earlier today as of this filming here on July 16th, but it runs through Sunday, August 2nd. So there is a whopping 18 days of programming, and the first film that I actually received from the PR team behind it, it is entitled Tunnels, Sun in the Dark, and I just want to make sure that I am getting the name of the director proper. So Truyen Buitak. So this is the director, the writer, the producer, obviously a passion project for the driving force behind this real-life story taking place in 1967 during the Vietnam War conflict. And albeit in comparison with what I have typically seen in films like, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, things of that nature. This one is coming, very distinctively from the Vietnamese perspective. And so I know that it is thankfully a awful conflict that is decades in the back burner. It destroyed countless lives over in Vietnam. And also, besides the American lives lost, those who came back here, who many of them didn't even want to go and participate in this conflict. They came back with some of the worst PTSD that, American forces have ever seen. So it was just, all in all, an awful war on both sides as far as losses and lasting trauma and damage and things of that nature. And so, yes, it just made its North American premiere today at Fantasia, and it is playing an additional time as of this recording tomorrow. I'm going to try to get this video up tonight, but it is also playing a encore tomorrow, Friday, the 17th of July, but that's an early one. This one is at, I believe, 10:45 in the AM local time. I'm just going to double check on that, but yes, that is correct. But yeah, so what a film. I gotta say, there is most definitely a budget behind this because of the fact that between just, even though there's not like tons and tons of conflict, there is a lot of just paranoia and interaction amongst the Viet Cong forces, these guerrillas that are down in these tunnels. But when we do get conflict, you can tell that there was a budget behind not just the American forces and their attacks with, bombings and burnings and all of those atrocities and things of that nature, but also the set design that we had, and especially with some of the camera work that is done, panning between the levels of the actual tunnels and everything. And I actually learned some very distinctive things throughout this film, most notably the fact that the tunnels were originally, like the first kilometers of them were actually built during a conflict a couple decades before with France, when France were invaded. I had no idea about this. I'm not extremely well versed in Vietnamese history or anything, of that particular nature. And so they were expanded significantly as far as like moving supplies and, just basically to just small little bases of operation and spots and like little outposts and things of that nature. So, the set design was impressive, and it was shot in such a manner, especially when there's like not just chase scenes, but just like trying to get from one place to another, and just the claustrophobic feeling and the way everything was, just that building tension and the nervous, uneasy nature of going through these small little enclosures and pathways and stuff like that. It was just brilliantly designed, and it gave just a very intriguing peek into the process of what the VC were doing and how they were able to wage a war against this much more technologically advanced American front and stuff like that. So just getting back into some additional parts of the story and everything, I'm just going to jump back to my notes so I'm not mucking everything up implicitly and everything, guys. But performances across the board. There is, I'm trying to remember if they pronounce his name as Ba, or it's spelled Bay, B-A-Y, but he's essentially the leader of these younger guerrilla freedom fighters down there. And a lot of them are really young. If I remember correctly, his daughter is one of them, but she's not quite the tough one that this other girl who ends up having, I guess, a bit of an uneasy romantic sort of connection with this guy that shows up in their area. And as was commonplace, because there's actually some interesting interviews with those who took part in the conflict after the credits start rolling, and that just peels back the curtain even more so and gives it that real life sort of heft and that just resounding sort of impact and whatnot. But so anytime somebody who was not like part of the inner circle and verified and everything, they are trying to see if it's potentially a spy, somebody who could be working with the Americans. And so this guy who wanders in claiming that he was originally supposed to be like in an arranged marriage with this particular girl who's part of the band of guerrillas there and everything. They blindfold him and he thinks they're going to kill him, but they don't. They just lead him out, and then turns out he has some know-how about just tinkering with bombs and things of that nature and the explosives. And so because that was another thing that was so big time in how the VC operated against the Americans, was they were setting these different like booby traps and bombs and tripwires for mines and things like that. And so this guy shows a knack for it, and so that helps to build the trust a little bit, and there is a mutual attraction. But I'm glad that, without getting into any super spoilery details or anything like that, is most definitely on the back burner compared to the imperative nature of the conflict, because their little outpost, which was like safeguarding medical supplies and stuff, and there's some things like some hints at there being more than just that, but their little outpost is kind of taken over and becomes a hub for a bunch of very important transmission of messages. And I mean, just seeing how archaic it was for the VC, they're trying to use like a like a Morse code sort of thing, and the guy is like on the bicycle, like riding it just to generate the power to even be able to send the radio signal and everything, or if that's the proper terminology. And so I mean, just to see how much ingenuity was done, and I'm not trying to champion one side of a conflict or another, because that was just a war that was just all bad in my estimation. And but then again, I'm growing up with the American perspective, and I know it's vastly different over there. So it just seemed like a lose-lose to both sides, especially, I mean, in the end, Vietnam did have all the American forces gone by 75, if I recall my history correctly. And so now things are much more cordial. It took all these decades and everything. But back to the matter at hand with this, I mean, I believe it was the Cu Chi kind of neighborhood district, and I just want to double check real quick. Yes, the Cu Chi district. And so, I mean, this was an area on the outskirts of Saigon, and so, I mean, very true to life in everything that we're that they were portraying and discussing here and everything. I mean, if I had, one of the few gripes, I guess, is that maybe I would have liked a little bit more character development from some, but it's like, how much time do you really have when there is just constant bombing, constant conflict? I mean, there are a few scenes that are incredibly tough to watch. One that immediately comes to mind, and this isn't like super spoiler or anything, because I'm not going to spell the fate of any of these characters or whatnot, but there's a time where, because the Americans would just blast bomb like crazy some of these areas where they suspected the tunnels to be, and the key thing was just not to divulge their position. And there's a few characters that are being absolutely roasted underground because of all the bombing and the fires up on the surface and everything, and they just want to escape to just some sort of just cooler air, at least, as opposed to just being like roasted alive down in these tunnels and stuff. But I mean, it's a indication of resiliency and everything. But I mean, from the score, which has like kind of this like soft, almost like somber sort of vibe to it that just embodies the bewilderment that was most definitely inherent in so many of these fighters. I mean, thankfully we do have a few scenes of levity where, there's one where they're all served fish unexpectedly, and, just the absolute joy in getting something a little more substantial to consume. And then there's another moment where they get some film reels, and so they have the projector down in their little bunker area, and they're watching, I guess, almost like a behind the scenes military rally kind of video. I mean, it's done very crudely, as you can imagine, in comparison with some of the, film reels and, things being made in the States at the time. But it still was a joyful moment. One character, he's in it for a brief moment, and he's like, that's my back, And so the fact that we do have those moments to just show that there were just bits here and there to take part in some joy. I mean, there's a wedding at one point in the, later in the movie, that just a little brief breather in the midst of the madness. And so, I mean, those moments really did help to add additional impact to all of the different, moments of conflict. And we get a very small amount of the American forces, but, as we get to the third act and the backs are against the wall, without getting into like major details and everything, and just trying to discover with some land troops, these tunnels, as opposed to just having, planes going over and, bombings, and then some tanks, which we see some of at one particular point, grenade launchers being utilized, things of that nature. But yeah, the conflict is very well orchestrated. It truly is. And, just the scorched areas that we see, just the degradation, the destruction. I mean, it just really just rings the point home even further that this was a conflict that there were really no winners, because so many on the American side were lost, obviously, but countless more on the Vietnamese side. And so it orchestrated that in a very just profound and chilling fashion. I was incredibly impressed with this movie, and I'm so very glad that it's going to have an additional opportunity for audiences to actually get the chance to check it out. Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, and but I do think that, especially for somebody who grew up here in the US of A and all of that, business, it's very important to see just varying sides of a conflict, especially one that holds such notoriety on, both sides of the pond, over in Eastern Asia, and then, here in America as well. And so, yeah, this is a big time recommendation. I gave it a 4 out of 5 on my Letterboxd, and it's well worth it. It's one that I'm hoping can either get some more play. This being the North American debut, I would imagine it'll probably pop up at some additional just film festivals and whatnot. But this could do very well in some limited theatrical, or if it gets a decently bigger run, with some distribution. But it could also make some major noise on the outlet like Prime or something of that nature, Netflix, where I mean, Netflix, since they do so much international fare on their streaming service, I think this would be right at home there. It would find an audience, and it would just help spread the word about the fact that there are two sides to every coin, two sides to every conflict, in most cases. Yeah, so wow, I was incredibly impressed with Tunnels, Sun in the Dark, and that is going to be my thoughts on the film. Once again, it is playing a second time on the 17th, Friday of July, the second day of the Fantasia International Film Festival. Plays bright and early at 10:45 a.m. That is Eastern time, and they do the military time on Fantasia. So anytime it gets over 1,200 hours, I always have to do that slight little math in my head, but I didn't have that problem this time. So I extend a grande gracias first and foremost to the team behind Tunnels that sent me the screener for this. It was a pleasure and an honor to get the chance to see the storytelling here and get kind of schooled, a little bit of an education about some nuances of the conflict, but also just the history of the tunnels themselves, as I mentioned, with how far they date back to the conflict with the French and everything. So keep an eye out for it, everybody. But I've been Jaimé En Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I do a little bit of the tiki-talkies. I'm going to be doing short reels, maybe, of a few of the films there. But that's what I save primarily for big time theatrical releases, just a bing and a boom. But since these are smaller films, some of which have not secured distribution yet, I really feel like doing a full-fledged review for these, especially with it being the prestige of Fantasia, the 30th anniversary of the festival and everything. I feel like that's a really kind of important thing for me to just make a vigilant undertaking and whatnot. So yeah, look forward to lots more reviews coming up. I know this weekend I'm also going to have Tight Lettuce, Dance Freak, I think, what was the other one? Unidentified Murder. So yeah, there's a lot of international cinema that I'm going to be covering. Once again, the festival runs until August 2nd in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. If you are lucky enough to be there in person, soy envidioso. I wish that I could. Maybe next year I can make my journey up to the Great White North. But as it stands, throughout the duration of the festival, I will be covering it here in the deadly desert of Phoenix, Arizona. So once again, I have been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and until the reel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, cinemigos, constant viewers, all that jazz. I hope that we share more of this film palaver sooner rather than later, and until then, happy viewing, everybody, and make sure to keep your eye out for Tunnels, Sun in the Dark.